To be here today. Hope this isn't too loud, is it? Because I can be too loud sometimes. Let's see. Okay, so a couple of years ago, we sat down, my colleague John Sipple from Cornell and I, with Cornell Cooperative Extension and all of your associations, we sat down and decided to do a survey together on shared services delivery. And boy, was that a good idea, because now here we are 3 years later, the governor has pushed this issue in a big way, and we actually have data and can talk about what's going on. So I'm going to present some of the data, which if you don't have it, because I did present this at NYSEC and also at the Towns Conference, there's up on my website, there's a Shared Services Reform That Works, which is a little issue brief that's more popular and easier to get to, that's summary statistics on the data. Also on the website are 250 cases of shared services that you all gave us on the survey. How many of you remember filling out this survey January, February last year? Thank you very much. The response rate was fabulous, and we're doing a lot of looking at that. What I'm going to do today is set this issue in global context first, because what's happening in New York State is not unique. And I'm going to talk about as we understand more what the tax freeze is actually about and the tax cap and what that means. I'm going to talk a little bit about the services, and then the particular question the governor has put before us has been this issue of significant cost savings with shared services. The punchline is the international research doesn't suggest you're going to find a lot. And we need to figure out how many we can actually find in the New York State case. Shared services is done generally to improve service quality and to improve regional coordination. Cost savings is usually not the primary goal, and it's only found about half the time according to our data from you on this survey. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about schools, because we also did a survey of school districts and the potentials for some sharing there, and then I'm going to end with the need for a state partnership. And I encourage you to interrupt me often with ideas, with questions, with critiques, because I'd love for this to be more of a dialogue, because you all are in a position here to influence the additional research we do on this data, and I would very much appreciate your insights so that we do work that's useful to you. So let's put this in a global context. We have a great recession that hit the whole world, and it called a recession, let's call it Recession 2.0, which is the recession that hit state and local governments. And what you're seeing is you're passing the fiscal crisis down from the federal to the state and the local level, and of course the buck stops here. And whereas at the national level, nation states give primary priority to propping up markets, what we did in the US with Wall Street, they also do in the European Union. At the local level, we're basically leaving cities to fend for themselves. And this is as true in the US as it is in the European Union. And I'm going to do most of my global comparisons with the European Union because we're most similar. Advanced industrialized societies with sophisticated local governments that provide decent services to our citizens. Our citizens are willing to pay taxes for them, and we've enjoyed decent quality of life and robust economies. How are we going to continue to do that in this new fiscal crisis? Now, at the city level, you're seeing 3 responses, and you're seeing them all at the same time. We're hollowing out. How many of you have cut a service or reduced a staff? Yeah, okay. We're riding the wave. How can we play this game? How can we make it work? How can we do what we need to do to make it work? And there's also a little bit of pushback. The interesting thing is how different the pushback is in the US compared to Europe. In the US, there's mostly acquiescence on the part of citizens. Oh well. In Europe, you see Occupy movements still in the plazas, which is kind of interesting. In the US, you see new forms of service delivery, more innovation happening in local government, because the good news and the bad news about local government in the US is you're the most autonomous, you're the most fiscally autonomous local governments in the world. You have more responsibility than any local government anywhere else, and you have actually a little bit more authority to play what you need to do. So that gives you opportunity to be more innovative. which is on the good news. And the bad news is a lot of the things that you're responsible for providing services for, no other advanced industrialized country expects those services to be financed at the local level. Education is a good example. Police, regional police forces or even national police forces are pretty common. Fire is often regional or national and funded at those higher levels. That seems odd, doesn't it? Kind of hard to imagine, but it's actually true. So in terms of following out, you bet, we're doing it. Of course, we all know the home mortgage foreclosure crisis led to a public budget shortfall, and it was about a 2-year lag before it really hit us. But you're now seeing cities cutting services, laying off workers. There's an attack on public sector wages and benefits, and we're all trying to figure out ways to raise user fees. This is happening across the US. It's also happening across Europe. What are we doing in terms of riding the wave? Here, there's something really interesting. What I have in the little bar chart on the left is the International City County Management Surveys, which are of all local governments across the entire nation. They're called the International City County Management Association, but their surveys that they do are only focused on the United States. But what you'll see here is that intermunicipal cooperation is the new reform. It's the big reform. It's bigger than for-profit privatization, and it's the thing that everybody's talking about. New York State has always been a leader in shared service delivery. Back when we did our first survey with NYSEC and what was then Soups and Legs class, we found that cooperation in New York was much higher than privatization. Now that is true for the nation as a whole. And again, we still find ourselves in a leadership position. But we've been doing a lot of this for decades, so it's not new. But around the country, it's becoming a bigger issue. With respect to privatization, on the national trends, they're absolutely flat. There hasn't been an increase in privatization with the latest data, which is from 2012. And what we're seeing is that the level of reversals, insourcing, reversing, bringing your contracts back in-house are equal to the level of new contracting out. And you might say, well, this is odd because the private sector is supposed to be cheaper. Well, it turns out it isn't. We've done a study of every study ever published on water and garbage collection, which are the two services which are the most studied and the most likely to be privatized around the world. And you find no statistical support for cost savings with privatization. So what's happening is some communities might save money by privatizing, so they do. Other communities try it, find that they're not saving, and they reverse those decisions and bring the work back in-house. So the reason why we're seeing flat trends across the nation on that is because as many communities are going out to market to test the possibility of a savings as are coming back in, finding that it didn't work for them. So the main thing to remember from that is this is a two-way street. You need to, as you experiment with the possibilities of alternatives, always think about the road back. If it doesn't work, have I maintained the capacity to reverse my decision? Because it might work for you and it might not. And the same is also true for intermunicipal cooperation. We're finding with fiscal stress that shared service agreements are fragile, and partners who can benefit from leaving the shared arrangement do, and leave the others holding the extra cost of the departed partner. There's also something going on that's called mixed delivery, where you're looking at hybrid models between public and private. And in Europe, these take the form of mixed public-private firms. So the 21st century state-owned enterprise, which Europe has always been comfortable with state-owned enterprise, the US never has been because it feels too much like state socialism. But the new form of state-owned enterprise in Europe is a mixed firm where you have public control on the board to ensure that your public values are met, but you have private management to get some of the benefits and flexibility of private management approaches. So there are these hybrid firms. In the United States, because we're so uncomfortable with the notion of state-owned enterprises in any form, our mix is at the level of the market. So you divide your city into sectors and you contract out a few sectors and you keep other sectors in-house, and you create a competition in the market. We've done national surveys of city managers asking how many alternative providers do you have in all the different services that you provide, and on average across all services the number of alternative providers is 1. So when you privatize, you're substituting a private monopoly for a public one, and there's issues around control. Because if efficiencies come from competition, you need competition, and there's basically not much competition out there for much local government services. This is one of the things that's driven the increase in intermunicipal cooperation. Because if you don't have a competitive market of alternative providers from the private side, look around, and there is your market of providers. But the word to describe ourselves is not competitive, but cooperative. So rather than building on the notion of competition gives you efficiency, we're now asking ourselves about a totally different paradigm that says, can cooperation give us efficiency? And here we have the advantage that we should have shared objectives. One of the big concerns with privatization is that the objective of the private firm is profit, and the objective of government is service. Well, now when you cooperate with your other governments, you share the same objective of service. We are a little competitive with each other, aren't we? Right? So competition doesn't go away, but competition actually in this case becomes a negative, not something to be celebrated. And so we need a new paradigm that thinks about how you promote and support cooperation, but we run into similar accountability problems. Cost creep. Think of an example of something where you cooperated and you created a special district, or you created a special board of something, and they get a little distant from the citizen, and they need extra for this and extra for that, and before you know, the costs are higher than they were before. So it's